So hi, everyone. My name is Aleka Seville. I'm principal at Collective Strategies Consulting, and in that role, I support BayREN on regional coordination and partnership building. And today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to move this so you can actually see this. How about that? That's better. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the BayREN Resilient Libraries Network. I'm going to go over the pilot development and goals, benefits of participation. I then want to spotlight our key partner, the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. We have Rachel Jacobson, their deputy director, here with us today, which is really great. They've been a just invaluable resource and partner throughout this whole process. And then we'll wrap up with some lessons learned and next steps. I'm going to go fast, but there's going to be questions at the end. Let's see. Okay, so why are we here? So BayREN embarked on both an organizational strategic planning effort as well as the development of a new business plan for BayREN programs and budget that was meant to cover, or covers, 2024 through 2031. We started both of those efforts in 2021. And in developing the business plan in particular, we did a bunch of stakeholder engagement. And when we went out to local government staff specifically, we asked them how current BayREN programs can help serve their needs, how we could evolve those programs to better serve them. And the priority of developing community resilience centers or resilience hubs kept coming up again and again, even though we didn't ask about it. So what we did was we said, all right, let's do some additional focus groups. Let's dig into this a little bit and try to understand how BayREN can help support these efforts for our local governments. And so what happened is that within that business plan that we developed, we decided to have two new public sector programs to do a lot of different things, but part of these efforts are meant to help incorporate energy resilience into local government planning. So the first program is called a Targeted Decarbonization Resources Program. A lot of great stuff in there, including a decarbonization showcase and education and financing, which will be very helpful. And then a second program that's called our Integrated Energy Services Program. And so this is where we're going to provide technical assistance to support integrated energy solutions for public buildings and CRCs. And you can see that energy road mapping piece is really where we plan to provide those services specific to communities who want to explore CRCs. So we're really excited about these. And again, these are launching in 2024. And so what we then said was like, okay, what can we do? That was back in 2021. So we said, what can we do in the interim to continue these conversations to help support these efforts ahead of those programs being launched? And that is really where the Resilient Libraries Network pilot came from. So just to make sure we're on the same page, I'm using the term Resilience Hub, Community Resilience Center, interchangeably. What we mean when we say that is we really looked to the Urban Sustainability Director's Network definition of a Resilience Hub as a community serving facility that's augmented to support residents and to coordinate resource distribution and services before, during, or after a natural hazard event. As you can see, though, there are so many other benefits that come from these facilities or can come from these facilities. So we really wanted to design a pilot where we could serve local governments and basically say, you tell us what equity means for your community, you tell us who you want to serve and why. And so that's how we really tried to design these things to make it easy for folks to participate and also to define these as they needed to for their communities. So our goals ultimately were to make sure that local governments are integrating energy resilience and energy efficiency into their local planning, to create a network of CRCs throughout the Bay Area that could learn from each other and share challenges and resources, and key to better position participants in the region for future funding opportunities to help support those efforts. So why libraries? So again, as we kind of step back and tried to think about how we could support these efforts in the interim, before the new programs launch, we found funding in our Codes and Standards program to support these efforts. So we knew we had to really focus on municipal buildings because of where that funding was coming from. And we found that not only were libraries becoming de facto CRCs, especially during the pandemic, but they're just invaluable community assets. We also noticed that they provide valuable educational resources year-round already, and that's really a key component of a successful CRC. And then critically, they're often the most welcoming municipal facility for diverse populations. And then I always like to include this quote as well, because we knew this when we started out, but people really value and love their libraries. They are just incredible assets, and they're already doing such great work. So we're not saying that every CRC should be at a library or that every community's library is a good site for a CRC. But what we wanted to open this up to is, are there any communities in the Bay Area where they think a library might work for this, so that we could really explore this and help those sites then learn from each other. So the benefits of participation in the pilot is clearly, as I mentioned, we wanted to form a network. We wanted to help each other, help participants learn from each other and share challenges. We found that it was critical to really provide support on equitable community engagement and facilitation. And that's really why we reached out to Rachel and her team, and she'll talk more about that later. This free engineering technical assistance is really the crux of the pilot. So BayREN is providing this for each pilot participant, and it's basically an assessment of their site and an understanding of what it will take to get their site from where it is now to where they want it to be to meet those CRC goals and to serve the populations that they want to serve. And then finally, we didn't want folks to walk away with just energy upgrade recommendations and no route to actually funding them. So we also worked with Rachel and her team to bring in funding and financing experts that we're matching with each of our site participants, so that they can work with those folks to get some recommendations on which types of funding and which financing opportunities would be best to implement those recommendations. So quickly, here is the site assessment report outline to kind of give you an idea of what our participants are going to have in hand once the pilot wraps up. So BayREN, again, is providing that site energy assessment. There's efficiency, resilience, health, all these different recommendations that we're helping folks to understand to basically reach their goals for their CRC. So we originally asked participants, who do you plan to serve and what resources will your site provide, in addition to a bunch of other questions. But we wanted to have them clearly understand those goals so that those energy upgrades recommendations would speak specifically to those goals. And then, as I mentioned before, we sort of wrap that up with those funding and financing opportunities. So they walk away with both the energy upgrade recommendations and funding and financing opportunities for both the energy pieces, the upgrades, as well as the non-energy goals. So programming, staffing, all of that. So this is our wonderful network. We have 2 libraries in the city of Oakland, 2 libraries in Marin County, our East Palo Alto library is in San Mateo County, and our Biblioteca Latinoamericana library. I say ours because now we feel like they're ours, but these sites have been fantastic to work with. They're already doing incredible work. So we feel really lucky to have such a great group to really form this pilot for us. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel now to talk a little bit about ASAP's role in all of this for the pilot.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Aleka. Really excited to be here with you all today. My name is Rachel Jacobson. I am the Deputy Director at American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And ASAP is a professional association and social impact network for people who do climate change adaptation and climate resilience work. We have about 1,000 individuals and 45 organizations in our network, and are about evenly split between public sector, private sector, nonprofit, and academia at all scales. And we have members all throughout the US, Canada, and the Caribbean. Together, we all work to advance the field of climate change adaptation by learning from Western science, Indigenous knowledge, and most importantly, and really relevant to this pilot, the lived experience of people addressing climate impacts in their own communities. And one thing about the way that we operate at ASAP is that we really believe that everyone across all of those geographic and sectoral differences can learn from one another. And I so appreciate that Aleka emphasized the network nature of the pilot. We were so excited to support and to continue to support this initiative, both to be able to bring national level best practices for resilience hubs or community resilience centers to bear, but also to share out with other places throughout North America how successful community resilience center initiatives can be supported by state and regional public entities. And so we worked with the Resilient Libraries Network Initiative team to come up with some support areas that ASAP could provide for the initiative. We provided and continue to provide program design support, focusing, as Aleka mentioned, on community engagement, as well as the development of the applications for sites, and the information that Aleka shared that sites provided to the technical assistance providers to make sure that their recommendations reports were as targeted as possible. So we helped design those materials as well. And then I'll talk a little bit more in depth about the 4 other things that we did and continue to do, which is an equitable community engagement training, community engagement stipends, funding and finance options template, and direct funding and finance technical assistance for sites. So first, for our equitable community engagement training, we had a program kickoff back in the, I want to say early summer, back in the early summer. And we provided a virtual equitable community engagement training for folks. You can see here just the agenda of the training, and I want to highlight some of the learning objectives of the training. As Aleka described, you know, this program really allowed sites to kind of define what equity means to them in the populations and the demographics that they're serving in their own communities. But we really wanted to support increasing the skill level of site leads and the folks that they work with to make sure that the community resilience centers could really center the needs and the assets of the populations that were already in the community. So, and at the same time, for a lot of folks, the concept of a community resilience center was really new. And so we wanted to use this training also as an opportunity to provide insight into all the different ways that one might think about a community resilience center so that sites could really effectively develop their goals. And so through the training, we help folks identify a range of potential functions that a community resilience center can serve, help them change their engagement approach to better incorporate key principles for equitable community engagement, such as moving at the speed of trust, addressing power, embracing reciprocity, and listening. And then we worked on skill development as well, really focusing on active listening skills and developing prompting and probing questions for folks as they're engaging with community residents to really elicit what those community needs and assets are to center in the design of their CRC. And we provided folks with some take-home resources as well. There's a lot of resources proliferating both in the equitable community engagement space as well as the community resilience center space. And so we were able to curate those for folks and make sure that they had a good, strong base of support to get started. And then what we did is we reached into our network here at ASAP and we recruited close to 20 volunteers to support the funding and finance recommendations development for sites. So we had about 15 volunteers participate in a working group that developed our funding and finance options template. And as you can see here on the slide, we provided programming options for their community resilience centers. We provided some general guidelines about how to go about seeking funding and finance. And then we also developed a curated database, pulling from many different databases that we have sort of floating around in our network, especially with proliferation of public funding for climate resilience. But we're able to provide some curated options for both public and private funding and finance that would be relevant for sites as they move forward and take action on implementing their community resilience centers. And so we made sure that that this options template really focused on next steps and actions. And then once we had the template, we recruited, we had 13 volunteers that we recruited from within our network to serve as direct technical assistance providers to the sites. And the purpose of this direct technical assistance was to really understand each site's unique needs and context so that they could take that funding and finance options template and really tailor it to what the goals were for that site. Answer questions about the funding and finance recommendations, and tailor those programming options as well. And so we have that technical assistance is ongoing right now. And ultimately, as Aleka explained, folks will come out of the program with their full recommendations report, including those critical next steps for action that come out of the funding and finance, the tailored funding and finance options template. back over to you, Aleka.
Thanks so much, Rachel. So as you all can see, ASAP was just a critical component of this effort. So thank you again for being here, Rachel. And we'll have questions. I'm going to quickly go through some lessons learned, and then we'll hop into the Q&A. Oops, let's do that. Lessons learned, the importance of readiness. Again, the pilot is going through the end of this year, so we're just sharing some key takeaways that we have so far. Technical assistance works best when you have access to data and staff buy-in. Not surprising, but this is one thing that we've really learned through and through for each of these sites. And I think even if you think you have access to data, it's a good thing to just double check and make sure. We outlined in our application exactly what participants would need. And I think we've learned a lot about how we can help and support folks to get that data so that that technical assistance can be as helpful as possible. But that being said, what we've also learned is that our pilot was attractive to sites that are in very different stages of development. The CRC planning takes a long time. There's a lot of different steps. So that's a good thing because it's helped us to learn a little bit more about that. But what we found is that the site assessments, that technical assistance, that can help advance implementation, but it can also help make the case to explore a CRC. So some of our sites are using those reports in very different ways, depending on the stage that they're in. So it's a chicken and egg situation in some instances. And so that's one of the reasons that we're really excited about being able to provide this for free for folks who are just exploring a CRC or a little farther along in their journey. Second thing that we've learned is the importance of forecasting, or the difficulty of forecasting as well. So developing a CRC, it obviously requires planning, it requires consistent community engagement, but also forecasting. So we have had lots of conversations with our sites about, what are the number of anticipated events that you expect in your community in terms of power outages, floods, fires, things like that. How do you plan to serve your community during those events? Is it going to be during normal library hours? Do you want to serve as a shelter, an overnight shelter? What would you need for that? So this is clearly not an exact science, but it's really helpful to have support and a way to figure out how to do that forecasting in a way that's consistent and meaningful for your community. The other piece of this is that we chose these sites because they are so, different. We knew that one of our sites required a full rebuild, when they applied. And so we tailored our technical assistance to that, but that obviously takes a lot of forecasting and a lot of just estimation in terms of what they might need. But we also, during the pilot, found out that one site, the good news is it might be renovated fully in the next 10 years, in about 10 years. That was a surprise. So now they have this great information and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make the decisions about what to upgrade right now? We want the site to be usable as a CRC now, but we also have this potential, renovation on the horizon. So how do we think about that and how do we plan? And then another one of our sites, we found out kind of midway, they knew that there were capital improvements being planned for that site, but then they found out that because of those improvements, or sort of in addition to those improvements, the actual library library might be moved. So that building that we were looking at, would that house the library, could not house a library in the future. And so does that still make it a great CRC? How should we continue? So I'm pointing this out because I think, again, not an exact science. You're not going to know all this, but understanding that this type of planning is going to take this type of forecasting, this type of just thinking through options and scenarios is something good to know upfront to help you figure out who you need at the table as you're exploring these options. And then finally, ownership, also not surprising. So our pilot application required that a city or county staff be the CRC lead. And then we also recommended building a CRC team, is what we're calling it. So bringing in community members, community leaders, library staff, facility staff, county OES. Who do you think you need at the table and why? So we have noticed all of our CRC leads have worked very hard to move these processes along, but they all have other full-time jobs. And so additional support, capacity, understanding, what it's going to take and how someone needs to own this process to move it forward is really, really critical to this too. And I think, the team piece is also can be really beneficial. So and what we want to make sure people understand is that you do need someone to drive the process, but you also need that quality team to help you along. And so, anything that BayREN can do to support that going forward, we're going to try and help people understand how you can build that and how you can make that happen. And then finally, again, not surprisingly, community engagement needs to be ongoing. So this is a long process, and you're never done on that piece. And that's one of the reasons that we're so happy to have ASAP here and have all that support and expertise being brought in. But that building those strong communication channels, up front is going to really help you as you continue on this journey of exploring a CRC. So as I mentioned, the pilot is going to wrap up by the end of this year. What we're doing right now is finalizing those site assessments for all the sites and matching folks with funding experts. Many have already started those conversations. Those final reports, again, are going to include those energy upgrade recommendations and the funding recommendations, so that's what pilot participants will walk away with. And then we are going to share some kind of deeper level lessons learned, just to help other folks think through whether or not they want to model this type of initiative, or just for an individual jurisdiction considering a CCA, that will help us, communicate what we've learned, but also help to inform those new public sector programs that we'll be launching next year. So I'll stop there and we can kick it over to Q&A.